Hello, everyone. Um, when we were asked this question to talk about somatics or how to explain it, it has honestly never really been easy. No word seems to, or words seem to be enough to talk about it. And I think it's that sometimes when someone asks me this question, I kind of start to overshare, and then they don't get it, and I start saying so much and so much and so much to make up for it, and by the end of it I just like I sigh and I'm disappointed and I'm like uh, anyways. So this is my attempt, as Navtej mentioned, to recall the somatic experience in words. um, and I want to share what happens in my body from the beginning of a session to the end. And I've been able to kind of create certain markers and phases that I've been able to understand up until now. So please forgive me if my use of language is not making up for what I'm trying to say. And yeah, so I'm just going to begin. And the first for me is standing where I already am. So we begin by standing. I close my eyes. I release a breath. And though I am literally standing, I realize to be present in the place that I'm already in requires preparation. And in this preparation to stand where I already am, my feet immediately and always call for my attention. I think it's my feet because my feet is what comes in contact with another surface, the floor. And I think that point of touch calls out to me. It calls me. And as it calls me, the question arises, what is my relationship to the floor that my feet stand on? And this is not a metaphorical question. It's actually so literal in some sense of the word that it's asking me who is holding my weight? The ground, the body, or where is my weight going? So when I stand, I physically begin to engage with these questions. And some days, actually, when I actually started somatics, this happened a lot, where I started to think about, are my feet straight? Are they aligned? Are my shoulders rolled out? I wanted to make sure that if I'm standing straight and like upright. And so I wanted to open my eyes because I couldn't see without my eyes at that point in time what was happening within my body. I didn't know how else to access this material if not for my eyes, or in that sense I guess a mirror. So you start to really question that when you remove your eyes from the equation, then where are you seeing from? And I guess at this point in a somatic session, I don't know where I'm seeing from, and I don't really know what's happening. But what I do begin to recognize slowly, very, very slowly, that my senses start to take over. My skin, maybe the fan in the room, the brush of air against my skin, the material of my clothes and the way it feels. All these sensations and textures start to enter the purview of my, I don't know, experience. So the idea of my body slowly starts to disappear. And I think that I would actually feel pretty confident in saying that actually simply just closing your eyes allows me to even place myself in this position of standing. So I begin to occupy the body I actually have and work with the tangibility of my material. So while I stand, I accept the position my body takes, whether my legs are turned out or my head is slightly bent and falling, whatever it may be, I accept the way I stand. And I really make it a point, I just really make it a point to not correct my body. I don't want to correct it because I feel like my shoulders down is is wrong. So I give myself the license and the permission to remain in this position. And somehow, the longer I stay here, standing in this place, all the weight that I may have been holding begins to trickle and release downward. And as my weight goes downward, it enters my feet. So I actually realize that I don't even drop my weight into my feet, which is kind of crazy because you assume that when you're standing on your feet fully, completely. But that really wasn't the case for me. And when I think of weight, I think of how can you see weight? How do you know where it falls? And it seems like the only way to understand it is from the inside. I don't know how, maybe over time one can read where weight falls visually or with the eyes. So for now, I'd say that these movements that happen on the inside of my body, and I can feel the weight slowly expanding into my feet and my feet spreading onto the floor. Sometimes an uncontrollable movement takes place and a slight sway begins to happen. That the weight on my foot keeps shifting, front and back, front and back, and I sway. And in these moments, I remember the more I would try to stay still, that standing is a position of stillness, the more I would tell myself to control my body and stop it from moving, the less it would listen. And I would actually begin to sway more and more and more. And at that point, it was a totally kind of crazy thought for me. But over time, I've actually been able to give in to this movement and this sway that happens actually without my permission at all, gives me a lot of pleasure because that movement happened to me. I did not move. What's also intriguing is that while I'm still standing, um, movement is already taking place, as you can see with the sway. So I think I'm standing, and I think that when I'm standing, I'm still, but I'm actually not still. I'm I'm always moving. And that thought started to make sense to me when I thought about my breath and the way breath moves when you are in a position. That when I'm standing, is my breath not always moving? Because when I inhale, my chest slightly expands, and that's a movement. And when I exhale, it slightly contracts. And those are complete movements in and of themselves that I just never previously listened to. So I realized that my body is not quiet, even when it's still, and nor is it subordinate, even when it simply stands. My body does not function as a mechanical body, as a car driving towards a practical and logical conclusion. So, this is the first phase for me. Simply occupying and embodying the place I am already standing in. And we are still standing in the same place. But clearly, I feel like for my body, many things have already shifted. When we are in this class, Navtej often asks us and talks to us and says a lot of things. But I think in some of the most initial classes, we always sort of began with the question of desire and why does one move? Because do we only move to drive a car to its destination? Or do we drive because we enjoy the drive? And I think nowadays I've actually done that a lot, when I just go for a drive because of everything. But I like that about somatics, that quality about somatics, because when you go for a drive, you're not tied down by where you want to maybe reach. Um, and I like that about somatics. So we continue by trying to engage with the desires that our body might contain. We identify which part of our body wants to move. Where is the desire in a precise part? And as precise as we can be, we try to identify these desires in our body. And sometimes it's hard to fathom that our body even contains desires. Because what is the shift from me standing still to me raising my arm? And I think that's the place where desire comes into the equation. And also understanding that it's the body is not just this whole, the body is made of smaller parts and textures, and that's what we engage with, to be able to move. My knee, my elbow, the tip of my fingers has a precise desire to be taken to go actually to a certain position. So as I stand and desire and sensations take over, I think that's when movement becomes inevitable. It grows as tingling sensations in my fingers. And actually, in the beginning of somatics, it was this crazy feeling where I just wanted to, while standing, fall. Like, I didn't want it to just like point by point by point. I wanted to just go boom. I obviously didn't, because I could hurt myself. But also realizing that the kind of desires that I had or that came to the surface were illogical and like meandering, and like they would sway. So assuming I now want to reach the ground, I prepare to move, and I identify desire in my elbow, and my elbow decides where it likes to go. And as it goes, I realize my head turns, my wrist enters, and my fingers start to become a part of the equation. So I realize that in a simple movement of wanting to raise my elbow, all these other things, all these other movements are always happening. And I think the structure of somatics is based on identifying and marking the parts that move along. So as my elbow rises, I take note of my wrist, I take note of my fingers. And once I'm there, I don't know till I'm there what comes next. You don't see the bigger picture, and you don't even see 50 meters ahead of the body. It's like identifying where desire stems from is just a way to eventually surpass all these structural modes. That you use the very thing to eventually go ahead from it. Or, and at first, it was also crazy to think that my elbow wants to move, though my desire is to reach the ground. Because what does my elbow have to do with reaching the ground? Maybe it should be something more practical and logical, like my knees or my hip, that actually do something in the process of moving downward. And I guess, in the most capitalist sense, you can read this movement of the elbow in relation to going downward as being inefficient, a movement that need not actually happen. But I think I would say that's the merit in this somatic practice, that it allows you to waver and linger and find a path that may not be straitjacketed, that may come from multiple different directions and different strands and threads. So I stop in that position, I stay, and I become the shape. Because the shape wants to be felt, it wants to be experienced, it wants to be seen, absorbed. It's not only a fluid movement that just keeps continuing. It's a shape that in its fullness stops and stays. And I think that listening is such an important word in somatics, because I feel like it's not so much about doing, but so much more about listening. Because the doing body labors. I I did too. I still do. I'm sure we all do at some point. And the body is put to work and is occupied and is tense with the final outcome. Because what is the role of desire for a body dependent on output? And what is the relationship that desire shares to what we eventually get from something? So, this is the phase now in which I meander and indulge and access spaces of my body in front of me, on my sides, behind me. And sometimes I realize that if I want to go down, I sometimes need to come back a little up and down again, up again. And it's this constant play and renegotiation that's constantly taking place with the floor. And I slowly begin to reach the floor, part by part by part. And as I reach the floor, two steps before, or three steps, I don't know, before I'm horizontally, almost there, Navtej would often ask us to tease the floor, elongate the reaching of finally getting to the place of the floor. And I get as slow as I can get. And when this happens, I feel like my body physically shifts, because I want to touch the floor and I really want to touch the floor. And the slower I go, the more and more and more I desire it. My breathing pattern changes and my arms are activated and my feet are activated. They're taking the weight of my body before I finally allow myself to rest onto the floor. And as I slowly start to go downward, I'm holding my weight, making sure my chest and my stomach are as far away from it as possible. And slowly, 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 allowing each part of the body to come in contact and touch with the floor. And when that happens, I enter a state of melting, very similar to how the weight trickled down my feet when I was standing, and a state of um, relaxation and rest, and almost like a huge sigh of relief, though I'm not holding my breath, just sort of. And my weight completely drops. I occupy a position my body finds restful, and I stay there. My body is silent. Slowly, Navtej asks us to get out of it. This usually means we recollect ourselves, and slowly get up and open our eyes. And when the eye opens, is when the after effect of the practice kicks in. Some days I'm invigorated, excited, energetic, and my chest opens out to the world, and I'm available and present to what is to come. And some days I'm silent and sad. But what revels the most in the after effect of the somatic practice is my eye. It is sensitive and soft, and my gaze has shifted. And things that were not visible to my eye before start, I don't know how else to say it, they start to enter my purview. It starts to be recognized and seen by me. I start to recognize things that I never saw before. I enter a less physical plane to a more, I don't know how, where layers start to be present, layers, a certain depth, a certain nuance, a sense of precision to whatever I am doing enters my eye. And I think that's what I walk away with when I'm just in a session of somatics. And there's a lot more. There's a lot more, and I don't know how to say it today. Maybe some other time. But talking about the body through words is is not easy, and this is my attempt to kind of take it head on as much as I can. So thank you, and I'm done.